myself, and just past 109 is a beast. They're doing all kinds of different things out there. So thank you for your patience and your flexibility this morning with us.
I haven't even made it that far yet, but yeah.
Okay. Well, then,
I think so.
really good. All right. Looks like we're on the record then. So then we'll go ahead and get started if that works for everybody. If we may, this is the regular scheduled meeting of the Private Probation Services Council meeting. The notice of May 3rd, 2019 meeting of Private Probation Service Council was posted to the Private Probation Service Council website on April 23rd, 2019. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for those on the phone. Just as a reminder, I'm about to read the statement of necessity. When we do that, we'll have to do a roll call vote for every item that requires action for the record. All right? So let's just go ahead and establish quorum by first calling the roll. Do we have Judge Larry Logan?
Present.
Judge Lynn Alexander?
Here.
Stancil Ford? Judge Brody Kane? David Nemo?
Present.
And then Judge Gay Starnes.
Present.
All right, Chair, we do have a quorum. We've read the notice of meeting. Let me go ahead and read the statement of necessity then into the record, and then we'll have to vote on that statement of necessity to be filed with the Secretary of State's office. According to TCA 844-108B2, if a physical quorum is not present at the location of a meeting of a governing body, the governing body must file such determination of necessity, including the recitation of the facts and circumstances on which it was based, with the Office of Secretary of State no later than 2 working days after the meeting. Furthermore, TCA 844-108A3 defines necessity as matters to be considered by the governing body at the meeting require timely action by the body that physical presence by a quorum of the members is not practical within the period of time requiring action, and that participation by a quorum of the members by electronic or other means of communications is necessary. This is the regular scheduled meeting for the Private Probation Services Council, and the purpose of today's member, with some of the members attending by teleconference, is to discuss the agenda as noticed on the website earlier. If that statement of necessity comports with the will of the commission, if we can have a motion in that regard.
So moved.
Judge Larry Logan motions to accept the statement of necessity. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Judge Alexander seconds. Now for a roll call vote. Judge Larry Logan.
Aye.
Judge Lynn Alexander.
Aye.
David Nemo.
Aye.
And then Judge Gay Starnes.
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. That passed then, and we'll submit that letter here shortly then within that time necessitated. As for the agenda, you'll notice that it's a brief agenda. We don't have much to cover in the way of formal action items, but the heart of what we'll do today will be that work session. So, is there any questions or comments or about the agenda? If not, if there's a motion to accept the agenda, and of course, if there's any edits, we can entertain that as well. Do we have a motion to accept the agenda? Is that Judge Starnes?
Yes.
All right, Judge Starnes has given us a motion to accept the agenda as written. Do we have a second?
Second.
Judge Logan has seconded, given us a second to that motion to accept the agenda. Now for roll call vote. Judge Logan?
Aye.
Judge Alexander?
Aye.
David Nemo?
Aye.
Judge Starnes?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. That is passed. We'll move on to the February minutes. I know you've had an opportunity to look over that. Are there any comments, questions about that?
This is David Nemo. I don't have it right here in front of me, but my recollection is it keeps referring to me as Judge all the way through.
Oh, okay. Well, congratulations, sir.
Like a good title, but
All right. Well, I guess that time will come soon enough. So, right for now, we'll make those edits. Then, thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. Now, with those edits, do we have any additional edits? Okay. With those edits, do we have a motion to accept it with the edits just so mentioned?
So moved.
Judge Logan has moved to accept the minutes with those edits. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Judge Alexander has seconded. For roll call vote, Judge Logan?
Aye.
Judge Alexander?
Aye.
David Nemo?
Aye.
And then Judge Starnes.
Aye.
All right, thank you so much. We'll move on to the next item. There we have the budget. It should be on your iPads there. Of course, you've had an opportunity to look at those in advance as well. At the last meeting, we covered the prior fiscal year reserve balance, administrative cost backs, the monthly expense report through November. We did a deep dive into that, kind of unpack that a little bit for some of our new members as well. We're not going to do that again. What we'll do is just, since we've already done that, instead of revisiting that, unless there's any questions, then we'll move on and then cover the new material. So we'll be looking primarily at December through February for this meeting. And as you can see, the trend is pretty much typical. You'll see every quarterly we have the quarterly provider fee, and that's no different. So on February, that's when that hit, hence the surplus. So you've got of course, your revenues on top, as described before, your expenses at the bottom. So December through February, we're tracking. I didn't see anything that was outside the ordinary in our expenses or our revenues. And so it looks like we're still at pretty good fiscal health. It looks like $12,495 is surplus overall for the year in our budget, and of course our reserves are still holding. So we're in good fiscal health. If there's anything that requires any sort of additional analysis, of course I'll bring that to you and we'll have that discussion then. But unless there's any other questions, that's all I had as far as the budget, and that's just for informational purposes. We don't need to vote on that or anything to that regard. Is there any questions? Okay. Then we'll move on to the legal portion. We don't have a legal report today, but we do have some legislative updates that I think will be timely, because that will, of course, inform our work session as well. So if I may, I'll go ahead and, if you look on your iPad, there's a couple things there. There's, two items. There's Senate Bill 141. That's the first item. And then there's House Bill 203. And if I will, I'll just go ahead and shift to Ms. Hooper, and then she'll unpack some of that for you.
Good morning, Council. As Mr. Kopchak mentioned, there are two bills I wanted to update you all on today. We will start with Senate Bill 0141. This was the sunset bill many of you are familiar with. And it was a bill to extend the council for 2 additional years until 2021. And then there was an amendment to it that would reduce the annual continuing education requirements from 20 to 8 hours and put a cap on the late renewal fee to 25% of the registration fee. Currently, the registration fee is $100, and so this would cap the late fee as of now to a max of $25. And this particular bill is moving, and it has been voted on in the Senate as of May 1st, and it looks like it's on its way forward. The second bill is House Bill 0203, Senate Bill 0293. Those that are present in person have a copy of Public Chapter 148. And what that bill does is it creates a process of audit oversight for the private probation entities by giving the well, it doesn't create it, it expands it. There was already some audit oversight abilities by the courts and certain representatives, but this expands it to the comptroller of the Treasury's office and gives them the authority to audit these entities and to hire a certified public accountant to do so. And this has become law as of the date that it was executed. Any questions?
That 8 hours happened. We were just sitting there waiting to testify, and did we even ask for that?
No, I think that amendment had been filed the same day that our bill was up for sunset, so we didn't have a lot of information. Either you found out about the same time we did, so it passed with that amendment. And I think there was one other amendment that was part of that bill, Sherelle, regarding the background check.
There was another amendment. I was looking at the bill history today, and it's showing that as of April 30th, Amendment 1 was withdrawn, and so I didn't mention that today. So I'm thinking that it's moving forward with what I'm referring to as Amendment 2, and that's the 8 hours and the 25% registration cap.
It's kind of odd that I don't know why they reduced them from 20 to 8.
I know that's something you as a council were thinking of discussing, is the continuing education piece. How do we better get involved in it? And now it is just the 8. So thank you, Sherelle.
Is there any questions about those two items? Anybody on the phone there? No. Is there as far as obviously, it's pretty, we just have to wait for them for it to clear, and then from there we'll unpack it further. But that gives us some sort of landscape to work within as far as our work session. If we will, we'll just move on to that then. Just as a reminder, this will be your work session. We don't have an agenda per se in the sense that we're going to, set that for the board. That would be the board's prerogative, and it would just be us to support that initiative from the board. So this will be your session. There's I know there's some possible legislative changes that you did intimate at our last meeting. So this is the opportunity to produce those, to discuss those, and I'll keep notes to that regard, and then we should have a formative agenda to dig into that further at our next meeting, and we'll just keep doing that until we have a rules or a legislative package that we're all comfortable with.
Judge Logan, if I could again, thank you so much for being at not only one but two of these sessions to move forward the sunset bill. That is very much appreciated. We just don't know what sometimes if questions will come up, so I know everyone appreciated you being there. And thanks to everyone else putting up with the emails asking who could come. So at least that piece is done.
Thank you. I was glad to do it.
Very welcome.
This is Judge Logan. I think at some point we need to just identify what issues we're dealing with and see if we can determine what the legislature, I know they're looking for more control on our part and more uniformity, but we've got 33 separate companies, and that's kind of hard to, no, we've got 32 now, don't we?
We actually have 31.
31,
So,
okay.
yes.
So the fingerprint thing, the check on the national database, I think that bill was passed. That was one thing they were going to do. So, Gary, you have any thoughts on where we ought to be on the issues?
I don't have any offhand. I looked through this. I raised all of mine last time, and they were addressed, so I'm okay with it. Everybody still here?
Yes, sir.
So do those changes need to be made in the rules?
Which changes are you referring to? The ones that are passing in this sunset bill?
Yes.
If rules are needed, we will need to. So yes, for the continuing education, we'll likely have to start the process to lower it. That's
Okay.
correct. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things we talked about, just maybe to kind of jar the conversation, kind of get it moving in that direction, is some of the things that you discussed at the last meeting were, ancillary service providers, human resource organizations. Also, you mentioned about starting an audit process. Now, the audit process, that was taken care of for us with the bill, so we can check that off the list. And that was going to be pretty substantive because you could go a lot of different places with that. So, with the legislators deciding that for us, that works out wonderfully. But those are just some of the things that as a snapshot that we discussed.
How is talking about the audit process, how are they implementing that?
So the public chapter that Sherelle mentioned or handed out, and you all don't have, I apologize, I believe it was just signed. It basically allows the courts to do the audits themselves or the comptroller's office based on what I've seen, and then the fee of the audit would be put back to the companies themselves. It says that it can be at any reasonable time, so I guess it's to be seen. I mean, it could be a court that decides we've got a company that potentially has some problems and we need to audit the records. It could be the comptroller's office that might periodically select companies. It hasn't been placed on us. So they would do those audits, but maybe if we open up rules, something for the council to consider is, do we want in our rules to list anytime there's been an audit that a copy be sent to our office to make sure that we have it and we can follow up with a complaint open or anything that along those lines?
Yeah, the short of the long is it's in the comptroller's office. Ms. Gamusio covered that aptly, obviously, but yeah, it'll be with them. So it's yet to be seen.
So I'm actually baffled by the 20-hour education requirement being dropped to 8. And I mean, one of my concerns was that even the 20 hours wasn't focused enough. And if, how do we oversee what these people are actually learning at these now 8 hours?
You can picture Judge Logan and my face that day. We were confused as well. So that's something then I think along the rules that we want to discuss. Do we then want the 8 hours to be very specific? I don't know.
David, where do y'all go to get your your education? I call it continuing legal education, but it's not. It's y'all's 8 hours. Where would do you have a state meeting or?
No, I think that would be beneficial. We did in-house training. Being a licensed attorney, I conducted several of them myself, but some of the smaller companies, I've always questioned what they do and how they get their training. Sometimes things are available in the community that kind of fall along the lines, but there's not a structured, here's what you must attend by what sort of, requirements or certification. There's nothing in place for that.
What the office gets when the companies are renewing, at that point they let us know what they've provided for the year for their officers, and it does vary, but they kind of list the names of the titles of what they've provided, and so it's for the most part in-house, or if they've got something else that they can send them to, but we don't approve it, and we don't necessarily get into the material of the course right now as it stands.
What kind of material do they use?
The name of all we get is the name of the course they provided. So something on domestic violence or better handling finance or drug related. That's about all we get. So if again, it's something for the council to consider. Do we want the background to the course? Is online acceptable? I mean, 8 hours is. I think they could provide a lot more if it's going to be so few hours. Don't have to right now break out ethics, and legal can correct me if I'm missing something, but I don't think right now in the 20 hours that they were doing they had to, but many of them did. It just does vary, exactly as the council has said. It's been so open to the different companies that this would be a chance for us to kind of uniformly say the 8 hours must include 2 hours on ethics. Many of our programs have the 2 hours on standards of practice and ethics.
I will say that in looking at the rule, this is Rule 1177-3-.01, it does talk about the orientation training a little bit, and ethics and professionalism is one part of a 10-hour block of instruction, but that is the level of specificity that's given in the rule. So it's not a specific number of hours, but it must be part of a 10-hour block, and that's in the orientation piece.
Who does the orientation training?
And I think the annual training mirrors orientation, so obviously now 8 hours.
Who does that, David? Do y'all have it in-house also?
Yes, everything we did was in-house. There's no, to my knowledge, there's no program available for misdemeanor probation to even guide us on ethics.
I know it seems like to me, Judge Logan, seems like to me the meetings I went to, the issue that dominated more than anything was the lawsuits against Rutherford County and Giles County. And we can think about it, but I don't know if there's anything we can do, because the judges are making those decisions as to whether the probation is being revoked and why. I agree they shouldn't put them in jail for not being able to pay, but that's a decision that the judge makes. So I don't know if there's a solution to that one. I think it was $13 million against Rutherford County, wasn't it?
Well, I came in to Rutherford County just before that started. In fact, I was talking to someone about it yesterday. I was reading the injunction. One thing that I saw when I came in was when a violation of probation was submitted to me, it had a bond amount placed on it by the probation officer. Well, I stopped that. That's not the job of a probation officer. That's either my job or the magistrate's job. Is that common practice anywhere else?
It goes all the way from. Yeah. It goes all the way from hold without bond. I know the circuit courts do that a lot. I cite all the violations of probation, and when I make a decision, I write on my judgment why I violated the probation.
But what about on the arrest warrant, the warrant itself? That's where the probation officer, and what they were doing is it was $5,000 for a first violation, $10,000 for a second, and $20,000 for a third. So these people in Rutherford County were being violated for non-payment or failing a drug test and being held on a $20,000 bond. Well, I just said, no, that's not a probation officer's place to put a bond amount on there. The bond, you follow by statute when placing bond, and that's the commissioners. Do other probation companies place the bond amounts on the VOP warrant itself?
Mine do not.
I'm going to say
They don't do that in Hamilton County, and you are right on that. A magistrate or a judge has to set that, and if they're doing preset bonds, those are unconstitutional.
Absolutely. And a $20,000 bond for failure to pay $500 in court costs, that's why they got sued.
Yeah, and the private probation company was doing it. We have moved away from, in Hamilton County, we have moved away from almost any private probation company. We set up our own county probation, where the county has to go over it first, and then the DA sign off on it, then we do it. To avoid these kind of lawsuits and these kind of situations. But in Rutherford, it was so abused, it would shock your conscience if you just read the federal judge's opinion. That particular federal judge is no longer on the bench. They've got somebody else there. But if you read his opinion, I think his name was Sharp. I can't remember.
It was Kevin Sharp. Yeah, it was Kevin Sharp.
Yeah, very good opinion, and it was astounding to me that the private probation company had so much. They were acting as a judge, jury, and executioner, so they have had to stop that. But that problem is not, I don't think that exists statewide. Now, it might be down there in that other county you were talking about, but we've moved away from trying to use any private probation companies.
Well, I use a private probation, I'll just say I use a private probation company, but whether I'm right or not, I look at them as an extension of me. They are there to ensure that the conditions that I've placed on that individual are met. And if there's ever a question, they file a communication with me. For instance, somebody fails a drug screen for marijuana. Well, rather than violate them for that, we have a mechanism in place where the individual can file, they can ask for a motion to be heard. They come before me and I see, is there something else that needs to be done? Okay, are they smoking pot or other things going on that weren't tested for? But looking at it, not just penalizing somebody for breathing the wrong way sometimes. So we're very hands-on. But I'm glad, I don't want to audit them. I'm glad the comptroller's office is going to do that. But I just think that somebody said, I think as judges that we need to be taking more responsibility in this. That the probation companies are an extension of us, I guess, and I may take it a little too serious, but that's how I look at it. And I think that they have a place because smaller counties cannot fund.
That's right.
And so I think that if we work it so that we just have a little tighter rein, and maybe through the rules and regulations as much as we can, because that's easier to go through than it is to go through the legislature, then if we say that these are the things, and I talked to my probation company, they would love some sort of uniformity in filings. You know, everybody filed the same report. Those kind of things. I know that just sometimes people would rather have something given to them that they know what to follow than being left out there floundering.
Absolutely. I can speak to the company I worked for. At one time, I think we had 14 counties, and I'll say there was 10 different ways of doing it in those 14 counties, and it was controlled by the judges. Not maybe a lot of it was just the way it's always been done. So we just, it's what the judges said. Keep doing it, and yeah, some uniformity would absolutely be requested. I'd say by the company.
Well, I know that the because like I said, I got a question on it, so I had read part of the injunction yesterday. It didn't apply to me because I'm Smyrna with General Sessions jurisdiction, so I wasn't in the lawsuit. But one of the things in the injunction it said is you do not put a bond amount on a VOP just for money. So if I have a violation of probation and all they have done is failed to pay court costs and probation fees, it's a criminal summons. And then they come in and I may just terminate their probation if they're at the end. But I really think I like that idea. I just don't believe, it's debtor's prison. If you're violating people and putting a bond amount on them, because they couldn't pay something. And I think that should be something uniform, but that would apply to us as judges. But I think that if we look at it that way, it's better.
Well, it's supposed to be a willful non-payment, and I don't know how the inquiry into being willful, how deep it goes or what proof is needed, but that's just another issue that comes up in those kind of things.
Gary, how did that ORO bill end up? Did it fail? The recognizance, the bonds?
We hired a really good lobbyist from the Waller firm to handle the General Sessions judges and juvenile judges conference, and we were there. I was over there all the time talking with them. It was like a second job, but I worked with Katie Bailey on that, and we got it narrowed down to just two specific things, and then the bondsmen and other people, we met with them. We had a coalition of about 15 different parties, and we killed the bond issue.
Okay.
We killed it. So it's going to stay the way it is. And with regard to, so the OR bond statute is going to stay exactly as it is, where it's left up to the judge or the magistrate, with all that other stuff they try to put in there taken out. So we were successful on that. And it took a lot of work because we had the Beacon Group and Cassida and some others really pushing it, and we were able to get it knocked out. So, and that didn't occur, but except I think 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago. So, but as to these private probation companies, I know that Senator Mike Bell, and I talked with him a lot on our Board of Judicial Conduct and Rule 10C stuff. Senator Bell and others, as a whole bunch of them, really. The problem with private probation is the definition of private probation has to be redone and redefined. And I talked about that with him and with several other legislators. Well, their thought process was to do away with the Probation Services Council altogether, and that's why they had these hearings, these sunset hearings. But one step in the right direction was for them to pass this audit that they're going to do. Because when they start doing their audits, and they will, they're going to bear down on the private probation companies, and the ones that don't meet their audit standards are going to be knocked out. Next session, I was told they're going to, and I'll probably bring this up at our General Sessions Judges Conference in September, that we as judges have got to get that changed so that it'll streamline it to make sure that they can't come in every time you turn around and say, well, I'm not doing probation. I'm just monitoring and reporting to a judge, and therefore private probation counsel can't supervise us. So I'm pretty sure in the next legislative session they're going to revamp what a private probation company is, because that definition, as we all know, is real ambiguous. So that'll be addressed. But when they get through reaming them out with the audit that they're going to do, I think you'll see a lot of changes coming thereafter.
Gary, you did a heck of a job. You wore me out just reading your emails. I don't know how you got them all out.
Well, thank you. One of the things we didn't do was notify everybody on what was going on, so I've tried to do that. So, and we did really well this year, but a lot of the things that happen is just like with Private Probation Services Council, they don't understand. A lot of them don't understand what we do as well as these other boards and the Private Probation Services. The Private Probation Services are in there with their lobbyists telling them one thing, and we're trying to tell them the truth. And they don't understand what's going on. But it helps us as judges to streamline, and everybody has to do the same thing. And I'm pretty sure you're going to see next January of 20, you're going to see them start moving in the direction to revamp that and redefine it to where it'll be, I think it'll be more, it'll have to apply statewide so you don't have different counties doing different things.
I think we should take the initiative.
I think we're going to. That's why I'm going to bring it up at our September judicial conference here in Chattanooga.
I think if we can find the places where we can take some control, maybe like agenda on training and things like that, I think that would go a long way towards satisfying the legislators, because that's what they wanted.
One thing I noticed, where was that, Sherelle? It said, okay, on the training and continuing education, which you said was in the 1177-301, if you go down to the end, it says, where did it? What happens when I turn the page? Who it was that could, where they could get their literature. And it was like, you can go to the library. Oh, it does. It says, private entities may obtain training resources from public libraries. Well, let's just go check out a book from 2008. Local law enforcement agencies, local colleges and schools, and from national professional associations such as the American Probation and Parole Association and the American Correctional Association. Well, that just needs to be changed. You shouldn't be able to go check out a book at the library and do your training for the people in your office.
Yeah, don't worry. Next legislative session, we're going to address every bit of that. And we're going to use our lobbyists to institute these changes and make it more definitive. And they have to do certain courses. They have to have certain accounting procedures in place. We're going to address all of that. This time we couldn't do it because we were tied up on other things.
Right. But do you think, Judge Starnes, this is Lynn Alexander, do you think that as a council, should we not start looking at these so that we can have recommendations for our lobbyists?
Well, we as a board can look at it and make recommendations, but the board itself can't be involved in the lobbying part of it.
Right. But if we make...
The judges can.
Right. But, okay, I'm thinking out loud.
One thing I can say is that we are asked annually to kind of compile suggestions of potential legislative changes for recommendations, and so that is something that this could be used for you all to develop essentially your ideal legislative changes that would be reviewed by the department to see if those changes are something that the department would be interested in moving forward with. That's one option. But as Judge Starnes mentioned, that lobbying piece is something that would be separate and apart from the council. The private lobbyists that he mentioned.
If we can get one of you or all of you to give us a list of what needs to be changed. Now, I know several things already, but if you can do a list, I can take that list to the judicial conference, and we can hit that next January when they get back in office, because they do want to change it. This time everybody was tied up doing other things, as I said earlier. but they did manage to get the audit in there. By the time we get around to the next legislative session, they're going to have some audit information, and I think they're going to be real surprised. But if we can get those suggestions from you real quick, I can address it in September at our conference here in Chattanooga, and I can maybe hand it out or tell them what we need to do, because it directly impacts all the judges and the private probation counsel anyway. So if one of you can do that, it would be great.
Sounds like this really cuts into our work session then, because if you recall, the work session was, the intent of that was we didn't have any legislative changes. We didn't have any judicial conferences or lobbyists working separately. So, and it was all on us initially. And so now that the environment has changed, it really kind of some of that's going to have to shake its way through and shake out before we'll know what we're left with and what we really need to focus on.
And I will just, say for the record, I think this does potentially kind of raise some other concerns as far as the Sunshine Law and everything like that. And so, as legal, I'm really speaking more from the perspective of us working within the council and within the department as we traditionally have. This is not something that I've encountered before, and so I would have to get additional review of this process to make sure we're not potentially running afoul of the Sunshine Laws in how these things are being handled if there is in fact some other organization with the lobbyist that's involved.
I'm aware of that. I'm not, anything we do, if we do anything, and we will, it'll be through the General Sessions Judges Conference and the Juvenile Court Judges Conference, because we're pretty much together. It will not be tied to anything or discuss anything involving the council. It'll be separate, and it'll be separate because if it directly affects our judicial conferences and judges as a whole, that's what those conferences are for. It's not tied to you. It might have a direct benefit for the council, but it has nothing to do with it other than we're just out here trying to change the law to make it apply uniformly, and because it applies to the judges. So we're not tying any of this into the Private Probation Services Council.
We're going to keep those separate, decide what maybe we think should be a legislative change. I think we'd go through rulemaking if we do very much, wouldn't we?
All we need is something from you guys, because as the board, we can ask you as a board to provide us with what you think would help the changes. And then later on, we'll do a separate thing with our judicial conferences that has nothing to do with that, and they'll have suggestions also. And then I can have our lobbyists take those to Nashville and make some suggestions to them, because I think they're amenable to doing that. At least that's the gist of what I got. But I understand what you're talking about. We're not going to discuss this outside the private probation. Anything related to private probation counsel, we won't be talking about that outside of our telephone conferences and whatever.
So let me ask you this. The probation council makes a recommendation. Let's just go back to the continuing education. All right. The legislature said they reduced it from 20 hours to 8 hours. We want to recommend that it be administered by the probation council. And I'm just throwing something out there, that this is more defined in the statute where what those 8 hours have to cover.
Okay.
Does that sound like what you're looking at? We want. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry, Gary. Yes.
Who are you asking that
to? To you. I'm sorry. I forget you're not here. I feel like you are.
Mine's going to be, I'm going to take any recommendations we have here, and I'll blend them in with whatever our judges recommend at the conference. There's about 185 judges. So they'll have some suggestions, too, and I'll send it out asking them about probation services. But, again, it'll just be, I'll take whatever suggestions we have here. There'll be many more, and the legislators have some good ideas, too, because it's not that big a statute, and it just needs to be better defined. But again, we don't need to. We can do that separate and apart from the council. We can use what we think are suggestions from the council, and we can use suggestions from other independent people.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to jump in. I think I brought this up the last time. These private monitoring companies are not regulated at all.
No, they're not.
And I'm going to tell you, I have something, and you don't have it, Gary. I have it here. It was pursuant to a public records request, and it is payments by vendors, and this came from, I think, the Treasury, the Comptroller, or the Treasurer, of each of the monitoring companies in 2016, 2017, and 2018, and how much money was paid out of the indigency fund.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to share with you my probation company that I use is called Tennessee Court Services. In the last 3 years, they got $1,890 from the indigency fund. The Smart Start, we're all familiar with Smart Start, okay? The total that they got for the last 3 years, in 2018, they got right at $297,000. This is our ignition interlock. 17, they got 160. 16, they got 60,000 for a total of 515,000. Tennessee Recovery and Monitoring got $800,000. And they're not regulated.
Well, that's my whole point. Is we as a judicial conference separately can address that, and because it directly affects judges. So, and I'm going to address, like I said, I'll address it at our conference. But we need to get it redefined, and I've got some ideas on that too. And Mike Bell, Mike Carter, and the others are aware of it. And we can, if we have it better defined as to the oversight, then we don't have these issues.
Well, they just passed legislation that told them that they can go back the last 2 years when the fund ran out and get paid.
Yeah. The fund ran out in like 6 months, I believe.
Yeah.
And so those companies don't provide probation services, or that's their claim anyway.
Right.
So they're not under what we're supposed to do. But there are companies that provide probation services that, because they're an HRA and or a county program, they don't have the oversight of our council. And I think that's a shame. I think everybody should have the same rules, whether you're county or private or HRA. And that's one of my concerns. Is how do we regulate one county and not the next one over?
That could be something that we could consider, is that expand it from private probation to just probation counsel.
Is that what they're talking about, Gary, with redefining the name of the agency?
No, they're talking about redefining who gets coverage,
Okay.
who is going to be covered, and the exact. So you don't have these issues about someone saying, well, I'm not a probation company. Well, what are you if you're not providing services? Like that one company was doing alcohol monitoring. Well, we're not a probation service. We just report to the courts. Well, of course you're a probation service. But because the statute's not defined good enough and applicable to them, then it's ambiguous and they get around that. Well, if we tighten those definitions up and have it apply uniformly to all of these companies, then we have less issues. And that's something, like I said, we can address through our conferences and with our judges independently and whoever else has an interest. Now, as far as changing the name of the private probation services, that'd be a big deal for them to do. I don't know that we want to do that, but I think that's a good idea, just to make it Probation Services Council. And but we can, like I said, we'll address that when we get together and discuss what modifications and changes we need to do or would like to do.
Well, when you're not regulated, we know that probation officers don't have criminal felonies. I mean, because that's in our statute, but these other monitoring companies, if they don't have any regulations, we don't know who's being employed.
Well, we have one here who does DUI monitoring or alcohol monitoring, and he is a convicted felon, but he's not covered. So that was brought to my attention. So, that's another issue, but it shouldn't be that difficult to amend it and determine who they want it to apply to and have those rules set forth so that there's no ambiguity.
Well, I'll tell you, Gary, they did it a couple of years ago. They brought it up, and it got killed. The bill got killed, where they were going to have to be monitored.
Yeah, I was aware of that. Mike Bell and Mike Carter told me about it, but they didn't have anybody on the other side deeply involved with their own lobbyists, and they didn't have different coalitions in there too. So we found out in a hurry this year that once we hired our lobbyists, they started asking us about everything instead of never talking to us. So it makes a big difference who's on the other side involved in it. And it's like the bondsman. No one ever got involved in theirs either.
Right.
Until we got involved in that. But I know they have a lobbyist over there, and I can't remember the person's name, but it would be worth our effort to get this resolved, because all this is going to do is cause more lawsuits.
Well, I think I brought this up, and I went back and found the article. It was in Hickman County, where the man was on the GPS on a domestic, and he went in and started attacking his wife with a hatchet. And the neighbor came over and shot him. And I've got the article. It was from WKRN, and the GPS company weighed in with the vice president of the company, stating there was never any question in our mind the equipment was functioning properly. We're always open to continue to work closely with all statewide law enforcement agencies to make the whole process more responsive and effective. In fact, in this incident, we've met with the Hickman County judicial officials to discuss improvements to the process which were implemented that day. Okay, what is the process? It's a GPS. That's your job.
Yeah, and they weren't monitoring it, obviously.
I bet they got $800,000 out of the indigency fund.
See, that's the thing. It depends on who your lobbyist is, and it depends on who's involved, and we can get a lot done on that, and it definitely needs to, because the more this is out there, the more counties are going to get sued.
Absolutely. And so, and actually, whoever the judge is, and I don't know who the judge was, but it wouldn't be any different than me. I'm relying on you. I put this monitor on this individual, and I'm relying on you to do your job, to monitor them, to ensure the safety of this victim.
Right.
And that's important to us as judges. But I firmly believe that, and I would assume as a counsel, not as judges, but as a counsel, anybody that is involved with monitoring defendants on behalf of the judge needs to be regulated in some manner. And I think that we as a council would support or make any recommendations to the judges' conference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I was asking for.
Yeah.
And then the judges' conference will probably do the lobbying stuff on their own.
Right.
Separate and apart from the council.
Right, absolutely. But I think it's a great idea, and I think that we have a responsibility as a council to make sure that these people that are within our purview, which right now is probation, they're just giving guidelines, and they know what we expect, and not any different than you being a realtor going before the real estate commission.
I could add, I'm sorry, Judge Stearns, I apologize. If I could add, I think we're getting to the right place here, and where we may need to end up is with the council, as we're reading the list, and it sounds like we've got the first item on it, then we will need a motion that as a council, we agree to have Judge Stearns represent the council at these meetings and maybe just state the 2, 3, 4 items that the council thinks are good starting points to add. And then that would be his point of representing the council and stating, and like you said, Judge Stearns, they would add to, subtract from, make their recommendations because we don't have a lobbying entity. That's, I think, the method with which to make sure that we're not in violation of anything. We would represent what we conclude, at least today, which is just we can continue working. But since the meetings are around the corner in Chattanooga and other meetings, at least I think that would cover a little bit of the concern that legal could have on what is it that we are moving forward, or at least stating we want him to represent, which I think is fantastic.
We're going to have to be really, really careful about what the council can do and what the legislature. So I think it's a good idea, Gary, to present it to the whole conference and get ideas, not necessarily to talk about legislation or trying to push legislation at that point in time, but just let them know what's going on here, because this is critical to a county like mine. We thought we were 28,000, and if we lost our private probation company, I'd be out there with nobody.
Exactly.
And I remember a time when we did that.
Okay. What do you want to do next?
I guess we need to start that list in. I'll keep a track of the list. I'll read it back to the council, and then you can vote on that list. And then as their representative, you can present it then. So I guess we can start with ancillary providers, human resource organizations, bringing those under the jurisdiction of. You may, if you want to clarify, of course, then this would be the opportunity to do that. So let's start with that one. What did you have in mind as far as what does the council have in mind to bring under that jurisdiction?
Well, obviously, anybody that's providing I guess you need to start with probationary services. What is that? Is it just monitoring GPS? Is it one-on-one client interaction, filing warrants? As a probation officer myself, I actually relied on outside services like the GPS services. They didn't work for us. They told us what was going on with the GPS, then we reported it to the court. So they kind of shielded themselves by having me in the middle. I don't know if that's what's different about some of these counties you're talking about, where they might report directly to the court. Certainly, if they're reporting directly to the court, I think they should fall under some kind of regulation.
I think if they're reporting or they're monitoring, period, they should. Whether they're reporting it to you or they're reporting it to the court. Because you're the one that's going to get stuck in the middle when the GPS isn't working. The judge is going to come to you. They're not going to go to that monitor. So
Is there a definition of probation services anywhere
yes.
in our enabling statute?
There is, but it's very ambiguous.
Remember, it came up with that company on the legal report, and we ended up saying that we didn't like it, but by statute, it didn't meet the definition. Now I got to go back and find my definition.
So the statute
It's about 5 lines long, but we can look into changing it to include monitoring and/or probation.
So the statute defines private entity. That's in TCA 16-3-903.
It means a privately owned and operated corporation. Now, this is private entity under the private probation services, so it's not inclusive of county services, that contracts to provide general probation supervision, counseling, or collections. So that should be broadened for persons convicted of a misdemeanor and placed on probation. Now, the other thing is these monitoring services, for example, Smart Start with the ignition interlock, that is not someone necessarily on probation, they are on bond conditions, like on a third DUI. Do we want to go that far to include ignition interlock people?
That's one of the things we need to discuss. I mean, we can add monitoring services in addition to probation, and we can do all we want to suggest it, and that's why we're just coming up with ideas.
Right.
That really makes us a much bigger, I don't know what I'm looking for, more agencies under our control. I think that gets beyond probation when you're doing pretrial and
I do too.
pre-service stuff.
But looking at the definition of monitoring, they're on an ignition interlock device when they're on probation. I don't have any problem. I haven't really had any issues with any ignition interlock companies. I mean, if we wanted to include, if we said monitoring and we wanted not to include them, then we would definitely need to identify in the definition that we're not included ignition interlock devices.
We're not drafting the legislation or the rules today,
Right, no.
so we don't have to get the word correct. We're looking
Okay.
for general intent so he can deliver a message. So, and I think obviously Judge Starnes would be, he understands this very well as given his dialogue earlier today, and of course has his own to add as well. So, yeah, I think we can just be general in that regard because he'll understand the particulars. Since we're not actually drafting a document. And then we'll put that in the way of a motion. So we'll say monitoring, monitoring, to monitoring/reporting to be included as a part of private entity to that statute. And of course, he knows what that is and can clarify further. So we've got that on the list. Is there something else that we'd like to add?
I think we can make some difference if we take over maybe requiring an agenda of some sort when they do their training instead of somebody going to the library and reading out of a book. I didn't know that was happening.
Yeah.
It's very broad, and we've interpreted it as far as meaning you can have a judge come and give a presentation for an hour. We've talked about etiquette in the courtroom. We've talked about case law changes. Certainly the changes that happened this year would be discussed. The lawsuits that have been filed, there's questions in there that, hey, as a company, are we doing the things that this lawsuit says? And so it all seems to fit under the current agenda for training. I think narrowing that down is a great idea, being as specific as you can.
Yeah.
So we need to look at revising the training and having definitive definitions.
I think so. I think the companies would love to have a one place, one stop shop to know they check the box. There's no question about that they did it right.
Okay. Well, that's number 2.
How are we going to ensure these people are doing this? So
One of the methods could be the renewal, which is what we do now. At the time of renewal, they must provide what they've offered, because that's kind of when they let us know who of their officers are still licensed, if you will, because there's no fee for the probation officers to be licensed, so we require that list to find out who to take off that used to be and so forth. So with that, they do tell us what they teach, and it's very possible that a lot of these companies will go above the 8 hours. Like you said, the training, general training, they may list on there as well. But I think if we narrow it to mandatory expectations by the council of topics that need to be covered, then as part of their renewal, we would make it a mandatory document and then determine what all do we need to see, who's teaching it, and the subject matters information.
that's what I was thinking in terms of, are we getting into rulemaking problems?
I think from a process standpoint, I think today's work session, I think it would be good to identify the council's areas of legislative concern, because I think that was, one of the original purposes of this work session to begin with. And I think these concerns would be codified in the minutes. And so if the board wanted to just clearly identify what its areas of legislative concern are, they would be a part of the minutes. And that would put the public on notice as to what the council's legislative concerns are, if that is what you all would choose to do. It does seem that it does seem that the council could be getting into a level of specificity that would be typical for rulemaking, and that's not something that we're doing at this time. And so I think my recommendation would be just to, if you all want to have a record of what you decide today, and you will definitely from the minutes, but if you want a clear record of what you decide today, clearly identify those areas of legislative concern, and then those would become a part of the minutes that are in the council's records, and that would put everyone on notice as to what the council's concerns are.
If we go back to the audit, they pretty much told us that's what they wanted us to do, right?
That's what I read it as.
And we don't want to go past that, but I think that we want to go on the record as saying that pursuant to the audit, that we are trying to address the concerns that were brought, and we'll go into them in more detail or more specificity at a later time, but this is just, it's important, and I appreciate you saying that everybody understands. This is just general discussion at this point. Is that correct?
I think that kind of where, legal might be potentially concerned is developing an actual list to kind of move towards potential lobbying in another setting. I think the council is within its authority to identify its concerns with specificity, and I think that a sufficient record could be developed so that the public would know what those concerns are.
I was just thinking,
General issues for the minutes of the meeting. What's done later on, that's of no concern. I mean, that can be done by any agency, including the judicial conferences. So that just, all we're doing is talking in generalities.
Right.
what I'm talking about in the training is making recommendations, I guess we can say, as to what ought to be in the training, like ethics, some legal education about what's going on, but no nuts and bolts of.
And I think that's in there. I think the 40 hours orientation training, I think it says each year, it did say 20 hours on the same topics, but it still doesn't define ethics. What are ethics for a probation officer? Where do you find the source of
Well, that's what we're going to have to come up
Yeah.
with, yeah. I think that's what the legislators are wanting us to do, though. That's what I read, the comptroller's report, that they thought we ought to have more control.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, right there on page 13, compliance with continuing education requirements.
Right.
We don't even know right now. Of course, I guess we could go through what they filed their renewal and look and see, get an idea of what they have been. That's really going to be all over the board, though, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we could, if we find that to be needed, at least pick the last renewal for each of the companies and provide it, or half of them, whatever you think would be helpful, because they are all over the board.
The actual reports that are filed, they're not standardized either, are they? I didn't think so.
The renewal form is, and they now do it online, but then what they attach and what it looks like, not at all.
Which was something else we talked about was, I think I went back and talked to my probation company, and they said they would love to have some kind of a standardized form for their quarterly reporting that they report to us or to the clerk. And
I
think you
emailed
said-
one in that was, I don't know if it, something to discuss.
They do. They've got the quarterly report. It has to do with the provider fee. But that's the only thing that we have standard. It's on the website, and they all have it, and they've been emailed and sent for
Okay,
it.
but there's a report that that the
File with the
probation
court.
company has to file with the
Yeah,
court,
that's
and they would like
nowhere.
that to be uniform as well. Because
Like
mine may
mine,
have.
I can send you mine.
Well, and that would probably be good, because I could send in the one that I get, you could send in one all of us
Council-
could.
The council doesn't see that, that's
And-
why I remember
Yeah,
that.
we don't see it, and then look at that and say, hey, this one looks really good, but if you added this part out of this person, out of this company's, and that was, like I said, that was something I think that we could address as a council, was some kind of a uniform reporting.
So maybe in this, as we compile our legislative concerns, would we include that as
I
well?
wouldn't say we would include that in the legislative concern. That
Okay.
would be something just for us.
The people that are licensed, I mean, would we not have the authority to request that in addition to the, I forget what you call it, annual report that they file?
Quarterly provider fee,
Right, but you said there's an annual one that they already do online?
the renewal,
Okay.
when they're renewing their license.
What do they file quarterly with the,
Just
just a fee? Just
the
a number
report
and a
you're
fee?
talking about, yeah, we don't ever see it. And I don't know if Judge Starnes would have a recommendation, but would that be something that at the conferences, the judges would like to start looking at, an example or two of good ones, and then they come up with what they'd like to see? And that's difficult because you've got all the different judges that are used to the one that they get.
Now, I think
That's fine. I mean, I can show that to them, and our judges will tell me what theirs say, and we can incorporate them if we need to.
I know looking at those reports would tell me a lot. I could probably look at her company and go, well, why are they doing this, or what's that
Right.
about, or this
And
looks really good.
And I think that it's more of a council issue, maybe not so much what they're, and how many judges look at them? I know I go through and review it, but they send it to me because the statute says they have to. I think that if they had to send it, or maybe a copy of it to the council, then the uniformity of it would be more important.
Some red flags you would see would be a two-man company supervising 1,200 people or something. And that
Yeah.
would be on that report as it's defined.
Like I said, I think that's something for us as a council to look at.
I think it falls within what we should be looking at. It gives us the information on the people we like.
Okay.
Put it in some sort of form so that our recording secretary can put it down. Just looking into an agenda for ethics for private probation companies, would that work? That go broad enough, because we went pretty broad on the first item. Because that would solve a lot of these lawsuits. I think it should, if they were required to understand, or somebody teaches them that you can't put people in jail for not paying money. That went a lot, Gary. That went a lot further than I thought it did. When you were saying, I didn't know they were doing that.
Yeah.
I came across a guy in an indirect way through John Edward Williams not long ago. He'd been on probation for 14 years. And there's a statute that stops it at 2, but they were trying to collect court costs and fines and stuff like that.
Keep in mind, that is also the judges. Judges are obviously involved in that.
Yeah.
The companies aren't putting them in jail. They may be beginning the process.
I think on this one, the judges or whoever was dealing with the company had allowed them to set bonds to try to collect their fees and things like that. And that's the type of thing I'm trying to get at is, make sure that they're being taught
Trained.
those type of things in ethics. And I think that'll stop some of the lawsuits when they find out, the things they can and can't do.
Absolutely.
And I think another thing is, I don't know what category this would come under, but some of the anecdotal things that I heard during some of these hearings was making probationers miss work to come to probation meetings, and then they were losing their jobs. And I don't know how you would handle that particular one, but there's some of the things were a little bit outrageous, I thought.
Some of it's probably going to fall under common sense, and trying to legislate that's.
The comptroller didn't think there was a lot of common sense being used.
I know another thing they did in Rutherford County was they were drug testing people right like the day before they got off of probation, administering a drug test, hoping they would fail, and then it would be drug out longer.
After they got off probation? Wow.
After everything's completed, so all of your conditions are complete, and just before the probation terminated, they'd administer a drug test. Well, they're on unsupervised, so they weren't expecting to have to go in.
Only thing, I know we've talked about that because we read that same allegation. And if you're making that a rule or a policy, obviously you've got problems. That seems like that might be your intent. I can say sometimes you're supervising somebody and everything's going great and you're not thinking about them until you get down to that last month. You're like, wow, I have never drug tested this guy. So it might come up in a way like that. But if you're making it a rule, a policy, or some kind of with some kind of motive behind it, obviously that's a problem. I don't know how we would regulate that other than asking for.
We're never going to be able to run down
can't.
these anecdotal incidents, but, just talking about what goes into their continuing education, that type thing, some sort of topic where they are required to at least address these issues. And once again, it's rough with 31 separate companies out there.
I think it should be more companies.
It's going to be more if we pick up this monitoring thing.
I think it should be more. I think there's 95 counties, right? And I know some companies have multiple counties, but I dare say there's maybe some counties that are sliding under the exceptions that you spoke about.
Well, and I know a lot of times legislation is passed out of knee-jerk reactions. Something happens in a legislator's district and it makes the news, and so now we have to go pass a law. And some of these anecdotal things is just like with us. That's what makes the headlines. But I think what you said was so important is if we had mechanism in place where those kind of things are addressed in their training, that's important. For somebody to say, oh, the judge told me I was supposed to drug test him twice, and he did so good, I only drug tested him once. Now I've got to go back and do it, and it's the day before. Is it okay for you to communicate with the judge and say, look, he's coming off, he's done everything he was supposed to, I didn't do that, do you want me to? Because I don't think probation officers realize they can do that. And then the judge makes the decision. And I think it's important for probation officers to know that. I had a probation officer tell me that a guy failed a drug test, and I said, why did you drug test him? I didn't put that down, that he needed to be drug tested. Well, he was missing, and he wasn't coming to appointments, and I said, well, where does he work? Well, I don't know, and I said, is it that your job? Well, he was missing because he was having to work, and she said, well, when they miss like that, that's indicative of drug use. And I said, based on what? No, it's not indicative of drug use. And sometimes I think that they need to hear that from us. And I mean, she apologized and she said, you're right, but I think that was my job to say that to her. And I don't think that probation officers often realize that you can issue a written communication to a judge and say, this is what's going on, what do you want me to do? And I think that could be part of the education and part of the training, and that I like the fact that you do have your judge come and talk to them. I think that's important, and it may be that they need to have an hour sit down with whoever the judges are in the community where they work. That could be, something that we could consider. What do you think? Judge
I opened
Logan.
up this can of worms.
Yeah, you opened it. What do you say, Judge Starnes?
Well, a whole lot of things we can talk about on it. I agree with you, but that's just one of several issues I already have, and there are other states who define it better than we do, and I've got some of that.
Oh, good.
And there's a lot of folks that, like Florida does it better, Kentucky does it better. Now, there's some other states as well, and some of them have booklets. And they're not gigantic. This isn't, rocket scientist stuff, but they do have to have, they need definitive rules and regulations. And that can be done, it has to be done legislatively, and then we can enforce it as a board. But until then, it's so ambiguous they can do whatever they want to, and they're not answering to anyone. And that's the whole purpose of this discussion. So I think we've covered enough topics on it, and I think we've got enough to go on because like I said, I already have a big list to look at anyway. Not that big, but it's something we'll address at our conferences, and I can get back with whoever I need to talk with them. But if you define these the way they're supposed to be defined and have ethics rules and what you're supposed to do, I think you'll see a lot of these other issues go away.
When is our next meeting?
It's quarterly, so 3 months from now. I don't have the list in front of me, but yeah, we'll be meeting in another 2-3 months.
Gosh, that's unfortunate because our conference is in September, and we're going to try to get ideas from all 180-something judges that are there.
We can meet whenever we need to. That's just when we set it. We're not married to it, so we can cancel that one and reschedule or whatever we need to do.
It's scheduled for September 2nd,
we
but
go.
as Director Kopchak said, we can move that date if we needed to. But right now, it's Friday the 2nd.
What do you think, Gary? Do we need to wait till after our next meeting? Have it after our conference?
If we want to discuss what our conference talked about, we could.
Yeah, get their ideas. When's our conference? 18th.
Our conference is September 11th through the 13th.
We can do a work session after that, but we will have to keep that next meeting because we have a formal.
I have August 2nd, but September 6th.
I'll clarify and get back with everyone then, so no problem. And then we'll the next meeting we have that's on the calendar on the website. I'll let you know what in fact that is. But then after we, oh great, okay,
Yeah, it is August 2nd.
Is it
Thank
August
you.
2nd?
It is
Okay.
August 2nd.
okay. So August 2nd then, and then we can do a work session after that conference. That would be fine.
Okay.
That'd be a good idea.
So looks now, let me just kind of recap them. We've got a couple of legislative concerns in keeping with our responsibility. Now, obviously, the audit's going to, when they start doing these comptroller's audits, a lot will come out of that. We've also got the legislation that's coming down. There'll be some administrative pieces for us to kind of tweak after that as well. So right now, our legislative concerns, as articulated, was that we'd like under TCA 16.3.9033, where it defines private entity, we'd like to include monitoring and or reporting to encompass some more of those ancillary and human resources organizations. That's one. And then the other item, too, was we want to be a little bit more definitive when it comes to the training and the continuing education, primarily as it pertains to the ethics and rules. We want that agendized and so we can track that a little bit more closely. So those are the main points right now for that the council has articulated that's of concern. So with that in mind, do we have a motion in regard that aptly expresses our I guess the council's administrative or legislative concerns?
Anybody else have concerns they wanted to put on the agenda? It covered mine. I was concerned about the continuing education. The other things, there were some people asleep at the wheel, and I think that's going to be taken care of because some paperwork didn't get filed. Somebody was filing a renewal petition or quarterly report, and we're just using a copy from the previous one.
And I think even a lot of those items, documents they couldn't see because between the record retention and boxes being flooded, we really don't have some of the original licensing files. So we're going to discuss internally, maybe even asking some of the questions that go back to the original license, again, having a way to get this information if we don't have it. So I think many of those pieces we can wrap up in the office, yes.
Yeah. Anybody else have any ideas that they want to put on the agenda? Or have we violated either rulemaking problems?
I think that you all have, by identifying your concerns for the next work session, as I mentioned earlier, that would be codified in the minutes. I think you're within your permissible scope of authority. The only thing I would caution is that any communications between council members on these topics is subject to the Sunshine Law, and so I would just remind everyone to be cognizant of that. I understand there are separate organizations that kind of have some overlap, but I just ask that everyone be cognizant of any communications between council members related to these subject areas.
I think what I have in mind, what I think Gary also is let our conference know what's going on. I don't think the juvenile court people would be interested, Gary, because they have juvenile officers, probation officers, youth services officers already in the rules of juvenile procedure, so I don't know that they'd be that interested in what we're doing here.
Probably not, but I'll send it out to the conference as a whole once we get a list, and then I'll add to the list, and I'll do that before we get to September, so everybody will be thinking about it.
Okay. And just get ideas. We're not as a conference, just letting our General Sessions Conference know there are problems with private probation. And if they have any suggestions or any ideas, would that violate Sunshine? We're not doing this at a conference now.
I think my only potential area of concern is when there's discussion of producing an actual list from the council to go to the conference, just from the perspective that it is in connection with some lobbying activities. And so I know the audit contemplated the council engaging in some work to kind of make some changes to address some of the issues in the audit. And I think that by having these discussions today, having those discussions codified in the minutes and setting an agenda for the next work session, I think that would put the public on notice as to what the council's concerns actually are.
Right.
Let me reframe that motion then, and then council, if you can help me if that needs to be rearticulated. But in the effort to make our agenda for our next work session, and as and in keeping with our audit with the audit findings, the legislative concerns for this council are the under private entity, TCA 163903.3. Council believes that there is an area or an opportunity there for that needs to be considered and that may need to include monitoring or reporting. That's one. That was one item, and then the other was we want to be more definitive. The council wants to be more definitive on what constitutes training and CE ethics in particular, ethics and rules in particular. Does that about cover it then in that regard? Is that a motion that we're comfortable with?
So moved.
All right, Judge Logan moves to that regard. Do we have a second?
Second.
We got a second from Mr. Nemo. Now for a roll call vote. Judge Logan?
Aye.
Judge Alexander?
Aye.
Mr. Nemo?
Aye.
Judge Starnes?
Aye.
Thank you very much. That's passed. That was all the items that we had. Is there any new business that anyone would like to discuss? All right. I take it by everyone's silence then, and we'll do a motion to adjourn. Do we have a motion in that regard?
I move.
All right. Judge Alexander moves that we adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Judge Logan will second that. Roll call vote. Judge Logan?
Aye.
Judge Alexander?
Aye.
Mr. Nemo?
Aye.
Judge Starnes?
Aye.
All right, thank you. We have adjourned. Thank you very much for your time.
Well,
I wasn't trying to steal it.
No, I knew you were. No, you can have that.
Okay.
No, he-